Today, we are going to talk about how William Shakespeare was super bisexual. William Shakespeare, love him or hate him, you know who he is. This guy, the Bard of Avon, England's national poet, good old Billy Shakes, Willie Dick Joke Shakespeare. He's sort of a big deal. He was also super into dudes and ladies. So, before we go any further, I do want to quickly address an important point. As I mentioned briefly in my Oscar Wilde and Walt Whitman video, discussing the sexual orientation of historical figures can be tricky. Modern terms and understandings of sexuality and sexual orientation are, well, modern. The word heterosexual wasn't even coined until 1892, so keep that in mind. If you were to ask Shakespeare if he was bisexual, he wouldn't have known what that word meant. So I'm not going to argue about whether or not Shakespeare would have personally identified with the label bisexual, or if he would have preferred pansexual, or queer, or whatever, were he alive today. Rather, I'm going to argue that, from the evidence we have, Shakespeare seems to meet our modern definitions for bisexual: someone who is attracted to two or more genders, someone who is attracted to their own and different gender, or genders, someone who is attracted to both men and women and non-binary people. We're also going to be approaching this topic with the deliberate intent to disregard heteronormativity. Heteronormativity is an attitude which presumes heterosexual is the normal, default, and expected sexuality, and that to assert anyone is anything else requires us to disprove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are not straight first. We will not be doing this. Instead, we are approaching the topic from a neutral standpoint, with all of the evidence which modern label most closely matches what we know about Shakespeare, treating all labels as inherently likely. So no, we'll never be able to say with 100% certainty which label Shakespeare would have used for himself had those labels existed then. But we can talk about which label he would most likely fit today using what evidence we have. So with that, let's first talk about who William Shakespeare is, what we know about him, and the evidence we have that he was playing for more than one team. William Shakespeare was born in late April 1564 in Stratford-upon-Avon. He was baptized on the 26th, so he was probably born on the 23rd or 24th, but we can't be sure. He was the son of a glover and was educated at a public grammar school. When he was 18, he married the 26-year-old Anne Hathaway, who was already 3 months pregnant with their first child, a daughter named Susanna. 2 years later, the couple had a set of twins, a son Hamnet and a daughter Judith. Hamnet would die of unknown causes when he was 11 and inspired the tragedy Hamlet in some ways. By the 1590s, Shakespeare had moved to London and took up acting, writing, and directing. He wrote 38 plays, some of which have contested authorship, and 154 sonnets. We aren't totally sure about when all of his plays were written, and there are multiple different versions of each play in existence, collected in what are called quartos and folios. There is a whole interesting history about the publication of these plays that we won't go into now. He died April 23, 1616, of unknown causes, leaving the majority of his estate to his daughter Susanna. Shakespeare was well respected in his craft at the time, but was certainly not the legendary figure he is today. And the fact that he is so worshipped today would make poor Christopher Marlowe just as mad as a beehive. His plays appealed to members of all classes in society, exploring themes of nobility and the nature of the soul, right alongside fart jokes and fat jokes and dick jokes. A lot of dick jokes. Now, despite all this, we don't really know a lot about Shakespeare's personal life. He didn't keep a journal, as far as anyone knows. Aside from some very basic legal documents, like his baptism, marriage, and death records, we don't have a lot of contemporary sources about him. He wasn't rich or noble, so despite his notoriety, no one was documenting his life very carefully. He wasn't even consistent with how he spelled his own name. English spelling hadn't been super formalized yet, and wouldn't be until Samuel Johnson wrote his very popular dictionary in 1755. We know he was married, when he lived and died, when his plays were released for the most part, and what general times he lived in London, leaving his wife and children back in Stratford. So how can we speculate about the personal life and desires of a man who lived 400 years ago if we don't have even as much as a journal to work with? His plays don't help much, even if we accept that the events of his personal life can and did impact his plays, such as Hamlet's death being an influence on the play Hamlet. His plays are often based on earlier stories or historical events, and are too fantastical to base much biographical meaning on. Quick shout out, though, to As You Like It, which has a woman disguised as a man using the name Ganymede and then dressing up as herself to fake date the guy she has a thing for, and Twelfth Night, which has even more cross-dressing, and Merchant of Venice. And remember that all the actors would have been men and boys originally, so what I'm saying is that theater has always been pretty queer, and Shakespeare definitely had a penchant for exploring queer themes in his work at times. And well, it's not impossible for straight dudes to write queer characters or explore queer themes. It is something to remember. However, we do have his 154 sonnets. Poetry, my friends, poetry is key, and I'm going to read you some of his poetry in this video. I'll do my best. The sonnets deal with love and desire, beauty and the passage of time. They all read as highly personal, and of those 154, the first 126 sonnets are addressed to a young man, the last 28 to a dark-skinned woman. These are referred to, respectively, as the Fair Youth and Dark Lady sonnets. The poems are all dedicated to Mr. W.H., called the sole begetter of the poems, whatever that means, and who W.H. is and whether or not he is the fair youth or just a patron is the source of much speculation and controversy. Is Shakespeare himself the speaker, or is there an imagined speaker? Again, we don't know for sure, though it does seem that the speaker and the subject are consistently the same for the first 126 sonnets, and then the subject changes for the last 20 plus poems with the same speaker. And y'all, these fair youth poems are something else. Don't let the haters tell you they are platonic. One of these fair youth poems, you've probably heard of it. Sonnet 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou ought'st, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growst. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. This is written to a man, and it's very romantic. Or look at Sonnet 20, when he clearly laments that the fair youth isn't a woman. This one is so great, I want to share with you the No Fear Shakespeare paraphrase of it because it's a little easier to understand. Your face is as pretty as a woman's, but you don't even have to use makeup. You, the man, or should I say woman, I love. Your heart is as gentle as a woman's, but it isn't cheating like theirs. Your eyes are prettier than women's, but not as roving. You bless everything you look at. You've got the good looks of a handsome man, but you attract both women and men. When Mother Nature made you, she originally intended to make you a woman, but then she got carried away with her creation and screwed me by adding a certain thing which I had no use for. But since she gave you a prick to please women, I'll keep your love and they can enjoy your body. That's just beautiful. I also want us to quickly enjoy Sonnet 52, which enjoys an excellent dick pun. So look at this one for just a moment. His imprisoned pride. Yeah, that means exactly what you think it means. And y'all, the poem I read to my husband at our wedding is one of the Fair Youth sonnets. Sonnet 116. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever-fixed mark, that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. Side note, sonnets traditionally end in a rhyming couplet. You will notice that proved and loved do not rhyme, though. They used to. The pronunciation of proved has changed in the last 400 years, from proved to proved, so proved and loved do rhyme. There's actually a lot of examples of this in Shakespeare, rhymes and puns that break because of modern pronunciation. But yeah, I love that poem. I love it and recited it at my wedding, and Shakespeare wrote it for his secret London boyfriend, probably, you know? Now we need to talk about the Dark Lady. Based on the descriptions we have in the poems, we can conclude that this lover was a black woman, though, like the fair youth, her identity remains a mystery. This sequence of poems is not only romantic, but also much more explicitly sexual. Yes, more sexual than the repeated dick references we've already seen. Sonnet 151 talks a lot about his erection, for example. Yeah, take a moment to read this. Yeah, so his flesh is pointing out his triumphant prize. Jeez, Billy, calm down. Also, the famous Sonnet 130 is written to the Dark Lady. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes there is more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. And this is a really sweet poem. It's all about how, even though the Dark Lady isn't some idealized goddess, coral red lips and snow white skin and perfume breath, rather, she has brown skin and wiry hair, and even though she's a normal person, unadorned by hyperbole, he finds her rare and beautiful and lovely all the same. I also want to take a minute to appreciate Sonnet 135, simply because it is so raunchy. Y'all, her will is so large that he wants to put his will into hers. Like, goddamn. Not only is that a pun on his own name, it is also very dirty. Okay, so that's a lot of poetry I just threw at you. I could probably go on all day. I love the sonnets, but let's move on. Now, when the sonnets are brought up in the great sexuality debate, detractors will often go to this argument that we cannot know if Shakespeare himself is the speaker, or if this private collection of over 150 poems is an extended exercise in dramatic storytelling, the speaker being an invented character who has no reflection on Shakespeare himself. To address that, I will turn to the scholar Arthur Freeman, who answers more succinctly than I can. Quote, I cannot think of any responsible editor who would dismiss the premise of homosexual as well as heterosexual passion pervading the sonnets, Mr. Freeman has written. Why should Shakespeare alone be thought so committed to the negative capability of his dramatic craft that all of his most personal writings are treated as potentially artificial? And even if we insist on regarding the sonnets, wholly or in part, as a kind of long-term dramatic narrative, why on earth would Shakespeare choose so often to impersonate a pathetically aging, balding, lame, and vulnerable bisexual suitor, abjectly winging about rejection and betrayal, unless the self-humiliation that surfaces again and again through these particulars were both genuine and cathartic? I will also turn to Professor Wells, who said, "When a poet whose name is William writes poems of anguished and unabashed sexual frankness, which pun on the word will 13 times in sonnet number 135, it is not unreasonable to conclude that he may be writing from the depths of his own experience." So remember that we are working from a non-heteronormative starting place here. Taking all of the evidence we have with all the needed grains of salt, what is the most likely explanation for all of the assembled evidence? We have a poet who often wrote about cross-dressing characters in his plays, exploring queer themes, who wrote over 100 love poems to a man, dozens to a woman, was married, and to some extent did seem to be drawing on his personal experiences in his poems. Well, bisexual. He was most likely bisexual, which is awesome. Glad to be in good company. Now, Hollywood, give me a buddy comedy about gay Christopher Marlowe and bisexual William Shakespeare being snarky best buds and causing mischief in Elizabethan England. Bonus points if Marlowe is a crown spy. I will give you all my money for this. Thanks for listening. I'll be sure to see y'all down in the comments. If you enjoyed listening to this queer millennial feminist with a BA in English ramble for a while, feel free to subscribe.